You're listening in on an animated discussion about Superman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the Cinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Superman the Animated Series, The Way of All Flesh. Oh my gosh, Joshua, I am such a big fan of setups and payoffs, And you know what I feel like with this episode, we are really starting to position Superman the Animated Series into Batman, the New Adventures, to a lesser extent, finally feel like they're in the setups payoff stage. This is a really small example, but METALLO, man, he's back.
Right. I mean, really, a person who was set up in the opening episode, well, I guess the third of the opening episodes, right?
The three-part pilot. Yes.
Right. Literally the first guy that Superman has to fight, and he's back, and he is leveled up so that he doesn't need a big armored suit anymore. But also it's tragic and terrible. And also, oh my God, Lex is the worst human being on Earth.
Joshua, all the things you just said make a recipe for a fantastic, or at least fun, episode of Superman the Animated Series. Lex is terrible, new baddie, setups and payoffs. And there is a hint of tragedy there. I don't want to make it sound like John Corben's a good guy, but there's still a tragedy there.
Okay, yes, there's actually some real philosophical meat to discuss when it comes to METALLO. But first, let's just take a look at him. Just look at this masterpiece. First of all, you'll recall, listeners, from our first episode about Superman the Animated Series that we discussed that John Corben looks like James Coburn, who I love. I love James Coburn, and making Corben look like him, great choice. Even if the voice isn't the same, you get that same like kind of classic tough guy Hollywood look.
100%.
You know? And now, when he becomes METALLO, he looks the same until
it goes full Terminator 2 with half of his body blown off, and then he looks terrifying because he's got the green kryptonite glow in his eyes and in his heart. Holy smokes, terrifying. It's
really excellent. I really like the fact that he's obviously a robot, but he also, when he's not enfleshed, looks like a skeleton. So now we'll talk more about this at the end of the episode also, but we've mentioned before how it really feels like, whether they were intending to or not, the creators of the show are really pulling from like old Universal monster movie type stuff, right? So that you get a walking skeleton, an undead thing, and then you make it a robot, and now it's both terrifying and appropriate for the very kind of sci-fi feel that Superman can bring to the table. I love this design. I love what it does for looking creepy. The green glow from the kryptonite is just an amazing, it's like a cherry on the sundae. When they're down in the hold of the ship fighting and the only light that's lighting them up is the kryptonite, it's eerie.
It's
and you're
fantastic.
right about the eyes. The eyes are so good, especially like that dark water, and he's just trudging back and it's all just like green chest, green eyes, skeleton face. Anyway, I've clearly tipped my hand. I'm a big fan of the METALLO design.
Joshua, 100%. I agree on the design. I do think, and this is not necessarily a knock in any way, I definitely think it looks like it was very Terminator inspired. The exoskeleton here looks very similar to the Terminator 1-2 Arnold Schwarzenegger vibe. But here's the thing. The twist is two things. John Corben's actual human design, for one, I think adds a layer that makes it look a little different, but also too, the kryptonite glow. I think those two things separate. He looks like his own thing, but it's kind of interesting when you look at him because you're like, that looks familiar. But whenever you see the human eye matched with the robot eye, it's just kind of it's sad and terrifying because there's like a soullessness to it that I think is really effective. And I know you mentioned that the voice was different. than what you
Different
expect.
from James Coburn.
Right.
The same as the first episode. I just say different than James Coburn. James Coburn has like a real, like a much gruffer, like, hey, what's going on, kind of thing.
Right,
So yeah.
right.
I wanted to make sure that I was clear.
Yeah, 100%. And again, and I think again, this is a very intentional decision from the creative team. I would suspect. But Malcolm McDowell, by the way, who is a very prominent actor, he's done some voice work. I mean, I think he made his big, like, I don't want to say debut, but like one of his more mainstream or at least familiar appearances was when he showed up in Clockwork Orange. But this guy has been all over all sorts of movies.
Yeah.
I mean, he played Dr. Loomis in those early 2000s Halloween remakes. You can see him in all sorts of work. And again, here's the thing. Not everything Malcolm McDowell has done is great, but I will say he is an actor who I think maybe not all listeners are familiar with him by name, but if you saw him, you probably recognize him. He's definitely,
absolutely.
I would say in the same way that Ron Perlman as Clayface, you're like, whoa, Ron Perlman did that? This is another one of those, like, oh, Malcolm McDowell, wow, he's not an A-list movie star, but he's certainly a very respected actor that most people have probably seen on the screen at some point.
Yeah, he's always working, or he was always working, absolutely. Yeah. You definitely, yes, listener, go Google this actor. You have seen him in something and you've heard him in other stuff. He's tremendous. Yeah, it's a really great design from every level. The Corben face, the Metallo face, the half and half, the voice, the whole thing is a basically perfect package, considering that Metallo is from the comic books, but this is a much more in much the same way that they gave a much more interesting origin to Mr. Freeze on BTAS. This is such a level up as far as origins go for Metallo that they, even though it's pretty simple, I feel like they really put the work in.
I think it's just about that setup and familiarity, and also the way they humanize him. And again, he's not a good guy. There's never a point in this episode where I was like, oh, John Corben's just a good guy who got... No. He's clearly a bad guy from the get-go, but there's... And we'll get into it here in a minute, but there are...
But man, there's always somebody worse, right?
Yeah.
And we have a worse guy.
Yep, yeah. And the way that you feel and again, to tip our hand a little bit, we'll talk about it in a minute, but like the idea that he has these very human desires that are sort of robbed from him without his knowing. I mean, that's pretty terrible. That's pretty terrible. So
it is.
But yeah, overall, I think great use of Metallo, great design, great setup in the pilot that has paid off here. So overall, very pleased. Now, Joshua, there are a couple of other designs you want to hit on before we dive into the episode, correct?
I borderline call them honorable mentions, but we do need to chat about them. So first, there's Workout Clark. All I really have to say is, I feel like they worked harder on Workout Clark than they did on Casual or Undercover Clark. And it feels like that's a look we are more likely to see more often than this one. So I am mystified. But whatever, he looks great. He looks like a guy who would be out riding his bike in the park at Metropolis. They did a good job.
Listen, they had plenty of time on this deadline, Joshua. It wasn't 4:00 on our Friday. That's right. This was more like Joshua. They're more like a 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. So we got some time to get feedback, to make those updates, and to move on with a much stronger design.
It's not margarita o'clock, so we can put the time in and actually draw these tennis shoes. Yeah. My other honorable mention, and I'm afraid that I've mentioned this one before, but I'm going to do it one more time so that I know I've done it. Black and red business Lois is a great look. It is just another one in her repertoire. I don't have anything to gush over except to say it looks great. She looks businessy, but also sexy and on point. I mean, for a cartoon, you know what they're doing. And it's great. I really approve of black and red business Lois. It might be my favorite Lois Lane outfit.
She's all about that business time in this outfit. She's down for business. The again, red and black signals getting stuff done mode. And I think it works well for her here.
It's the power suit, She can be a little softer when she's wearing the lavender, but she's all business when she's in black and red. So
Hey, listen, I think everybody is okay with us pointing out Lois Lane's wardrobe because I think it signals exactly what Lois we have in this episode, all right? And business Lois
They did a great job on her, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all of the designs. Now we can actually climb into some of the actual story beats and philosophy of this episode. Let me posit you a question. It is the METALLO question, if you will. Would you, Caleb, trade every bodily sensation of pleasure in order to also get rid of every bodily sensation of pain or suffering? Is never smelling a rose or feeling the warmth of the sun or the comforting touch of another human being worth it if you also don't age, get sick, or ever feel pain?
Well, firstly, Joshua, very nice nod to the Mr. Freeze monologue. I didn't note that here, but I also had that exact thought when I was watching it. So the answer is no. I would not sacrifice the experience of being human for immortality, essentially. And that is, I think, a great philosophical question they're posing here. If you could get what you wanted, would it be worth it to sacrifice the thing that makes that thing you want worth it? And I say no. I say no personally. And here's the thing that I find tricky is METALLO didn't. He was tricked into answering that question before he knew it was a question.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, is that the cool thing about this episode is we can take a step back and ask that question knowingly. Like, would we do that? And for what it's worth, I think that I agree with you. Now, I'm currently very healthy and in more or less the middle prime, the late prime of my life, so it's easy for me to say, no, it's fine. But I'd like to believe that even as a much older person, I would be like, no. Those are the things that make living worth living. I don't want to trade them, even if I just get to, see more and longer. So I think I am agreeing with you, but it is very cool. We get to ask that question knowingly, and then we get to kind of step behind that curtain and go, how screwed is John Corben right now? And he didn't even get to choose.
Right. Well, again, he was like, he wasn't given the choice. He was just told, this is how we're going to save your life from this virus, which, by the way, I know I don't want to touch on real world stuff too much, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that is also a very timely thing that we're all thinking about to some extent, I would say.
May heaven help us that we're all out of this problem by the time this episode airs.
Please.
And that this is just like a nostalgic memory, but that's probably not how it's going to go. So yeah, we're right in the throes of serious sickness sweeping the world. And I gotta tell you, that really did make a mysterious virus showing up in Corben difficult for me to watch when I was prepping for this episode.
100%. I winced when they said the term, virus. I was like, oof. And I think it just adds a different lens. And I don't want to belabor the point because we're here to have fun. Listeners are here to have fun. But I want to just say that it's hard not to watch things through a critical lens without acknowledging the perspective you're coming from. And I think when you talk about a character being given the choice to accept this like borderline immortality or to die of this virus, I think right now a lot of people might have different answers than they would normally. So it's worth noting that he was basically said, hey, the only way to cure this virus is we're going to transfer your body into this robot body, which, by the way, is going to make you healthy. You're going to get revenge on Superman. You're going to get revenge on Lois Lane. And you're going to be taken care of without the consequences being a known factor.
Yes. So this is the way that I have it phrased in my notes. And it is that Corben as METALLO may appear monstrous, but Lex is the truly monstrous person. He is rotten and a horror show on the inside because he not only poisoned John Corben to put him in a position where Corben would take this deal, but he didn't even have the decency to tell him the truth about what the treatment would do to him.
Right.
I mean, the guy's back is already up against a wall, and Lex is still like, well, I'm not going to take this chance. We're skipping the catch in the deal. Don't tell him,
Only the benefits.
Yeah, only the benefits. Just we got to get him. Listen, John, what's it going to take for us to get you into this nice, shiny Metallo body today, huh? I got my manager on the phone. What do we need to do? Is the deal that Lex is doing to him. To the point where Lex even says there will be adjustments made. And then later, the scientist, in just so matter-of-factly, but it just chilled me when he was like, the adjustments were yours to make.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh, right? My gosh.
Oh, that actually made my heart wrench a little bit too. Like
so cold.
You're like, oh well, we meant you would take care of it. So Lex was PR spinning him on top of the fact that he was lying to him from the get go. It was a plant. The virus was a plant, and so Corben never really even had a chance to make an informed decision. Firstly, he was lied to from the get-go. The virus was a lie, and he wasn't given the option to make a choice.
Yes. Yeah. Every single choice that could have been his was taken away, and he winds up trapped in this body. And the real question is, now this is very heavy, and I want to kind of do trigger warnings, but let's be honest. Someone who's trapped in a sensory or a near sensory deprivation tank, kind of thing, who can see a world that they can't really interact with, even if he wanted to end it all, it's not clear that he could, because he's basically indestructible as Metallo.
Right.
So even the sort of the most difficult to talk about escape that might be on his menu, that choice has also been taken away from him. His life is ruined, and it was ruined 2 or 3 times over by Lex Luthor.
Right.
And Lex knew it, manipulated it all the way. I mean, my eyes are wide open for just a more black-hearted move by Lex, but I will be surprised if we see one. We may see some that equal this, but this is just so callous and terrible. It's the worst Lex could be.
Yes. And I want to reiterate here, one thing I had a lot of monkey's paw running through my head at this time, which is, I find it funny.
Absolutely, yeah.
Metallo's if I only, I want to get revenge on Superman and Lois Lane for putting me in here. And it's well, you got the wish. Lex Luthor gave you your wish. It just, he also didn't clarify on all the consequences that would come along with it, So it's kind of like that, a little bit of that be careful what you wish for sort of thing going on. But
absolutely,
I don't want to take away from the fact that, yes, Metallo, not a good guy, but is clearly being wildly manipulated on about every level. So I just want to reiterate there.
We can absolutely live in a headspace where we recognize that John Corben is a bad man who deserved prison or something,
right?
For his crimes and misdeeds, while also feeling like this punishment is too far.
Yes.
I mean, we can hold both of those things.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think you have to, because this is the most inhumane thing you could do to another human being, I think.
Totally. Trap them in an eternal, they're stuck in a body that they don't want to be in, and it's not there's not an easy way out.
And what's fascinating, I'll say this is worth saying, because this is another DC property, both in the comics and in a live action version now. But if you really want to see somebody dive into that, somebody who didn't even have revenge as a spur, that it was just accidents. Cliff Steele, aka Robot Man of the Doom Patrol, is very similar to Metallo. He was a race car driver. There was a big accident. He nearly died. His brain was saved, but only by being put into this robot body. That's his whole life from now on. And he has to figure out how to live it, right? Because he's a heroic figure in the Doom Patrol, or at least a much more protagonist as opposed to antagonist in Metallo, we really get to dive into that and see what that would be like, both in the comics and on the DC Universe live action show of Doom Patrol, which is fantastic, and I highly recommend it, not just for Brendan Fraser as Robot Man, but also for that. So it's such a deep well. DC went to it twice.
Hey, okay, I'm not going to jump too far into this, but I just have to say, guys, as a Brendan Fraser fan, and Joshua, I know you're in this party as well, it's just good.
Love him.
It's just good to see him working, period, especially on a DC property as a super plus. But I just want to reiterate, Joshua, I don't want to take us too far back, but I will say, and I don't know if you and I see eye to eye on this particular thing, but I have long been a fan of the Lex Luthor is basically responsible for Superman. Not totally. Like, as in, Superman is his own person. He's got his own origin story separate from Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor didn't create him. But I do like the idea that Lex Luthor is extremely hands-on and involved in basically Superman's entire rogues gallery. I like it.
Sure.
I like it because it kind of highlights something that we've talked about on the show before, which is, Metropolis is supposed to be this great, shining, like, civilization. It's like the city everyone should aspire to be like, right? And on the surface, much like Lex Luthor, you're like, wow, billionaire, has his stuff together. This is great. Like this guy building a city. What could go wrong? Where really, at his core, he's rotting and a terrible, evil person. So much so that basically every villain in Superman's Rogues Gallery is either created by or minimally Luthor works with to create havoc on the city and the world by extension. Yeah. I personally like that. Now, I know not everyone's a fan of it, but I just think it highlights, like, if Lex Luthor is supposed to represent Metropolis, in a lot of ways, Superman is there to save it and redeem it. And Lex Luthor's kind of the thing overall that, even though he's supposed to be like the best citizen of them all, he's the one who's really saving the city. Superman's really the one who's saving the city.
Yeah, no, okay. So I think the only place that we would diverge on that is that, Business Lex is nowhere near my number one pick for how Lex should be.
Sure.
But if I'm going to be saddled with that, then absolutely the man who is a billionaire and owns a whole company that is doing all kinds of shady weapons deals should 100% be involved in huge chunks of accidentally or on purpose creating Superman's Rogues Gallery. I think that makes so much more sense than Wayne Enterprises accidentally making a bunch of supervillains, right? Which was a thing that BTAS avoided, but the very next Batman cartoon, The Batman, did not avoid so well, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. You could be in danger of making some of the other rogues a little one note if they're all tied to Lex. But I mean, you've also got the Toy Man, who is not tied to Lex and is super creepy. And you're going to have Inner Gang, which doesn't have anything to do with Lex and actually gets cosmic. So if he's involved in 70 or 80% of them, but the other, 20 or 30% are really rock solid concepts, no, that's great. I think that's wonderful. And it's especially true when you put him in contrast with Superman, because one thing that I've said when I'm feeling, very literary about it is that Lex is very much a Miltonian Satan. I would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. And when he's out here making these kinds of devil's bargains with people to turn them into supervillains, it just reinforces that satanic bend of his personality.
Right, absolutely. No, I 100% agree with that. And I do like the reading that basically, Lex Luthor is the human race without like a messiah figure, and I don't want to get too much into the theology rabbit hole because I myself have complex feelings about all of it. But I do like the idea that basically, like, Lex Luthor's the guy who says, I can do this on my own. I don't need any help. Like, I can make a better world without this other figure, or also the one who is tempting the other people. While Superman is basically like, listen, clearly this isn't working out for you, so I'm here to do it. And what you see is Lex Luthor lashing out and fighting against that. And like his whole thing is like, if this city is going to thrive, or if this world, the human race, is going to be great, it's only because of me that they're able to do that. Superman is not necessary. Whereas, Lex Luthor, where Superman is saying, no, you don't have it together. You're driven by ego. There's all sorts of problems. I'm here to help you, save you from yourself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yes.
And I'm a big fan of that reading. Again, there are a lot of theological implications if you chase that rabbit hole that I have complex feelings on, but I like it.
Here's the least theological way to put that I think we can definitely agree on, is that when they are written well, Superman is always the best example of us.
Yes.
He's everything that is good and altruistic and compassionate and honest and true and helpful in us. And Lex is everything terrible about us.
Yes.
He's everything jealous and venal and just angry and full of rage and egomaniacal, just everything that is negative about humanity, that's Lex.
Yep.
And everything that is good about us, that's Superman. And the fact that Lex hides the worst of himself so effectively is also part of that metaphor.
That is a really good point, Joshua, because he is able, I mean, again, we'll get to this long term in the series. This does catch up with Lex eventually, but you're right. For probably decades, he's able to hide how terrible a person he is, which is a part of the most effective, horrible humans. Like, they're able to hide the really terrible things they do to other people and pass it off as like success and doing good for the world, while simultaneously they're treating other people poorly. What is so ironic about all this is, again, John Corben's not even a good guy. He's a bad guy. He's like a gun for hire who's probably done a lot of terrible things. But even someone who does the most terrible things does not deserve this sort of treatment, I think is what we're getting at.
Yes.
Like, this is such a twisted thing to do. Like, it's so much worse than what John Corben probably does on the regular, right?
Absolutely. He's a soldier of fortune. He has murdered people. And I'm not endorsing murder, but this thing that Lex does is so much deeper than just, murder, it's over. You're dead. Other people have to mourn you. I'm not saying it's not tragic, but the difference of ending a life versus ruining one, it takes so much more planning and so much more effort to ruin a person than to kill them. And Lex is happy to go to it. Okay. I feel like that's the big philosophical points. I wanted to point out a couple of relatively small beats, but that just, again, really tugged at my heart in this episode.
Sure.
First was, once again, I really approve of the fact that Lois comes out to save Superman.
Yes, this was great, by the way. This entire sequence was fantastic. One, because I think it raises a point about weird bad guys doing really terrible things to women, which I think even is still terrible, but also because Lois saves Superman, and also because there's a great insurance joke, and I'm a sucker for insurance jokes. So I'm glad she had. I really hope her coverage included robot crashes or robot tragedies in that insurance.
It's an act of God. He's Superman, not God. Anyway.
Oh, that's good. She might have a case. She might have legs to stand on for that one.
You're right. I know. Okay. The other one also involves Lois, and in this case, Clark. When they are searching the prison doctor's office, and Lois says that she's not even sure that it's Superman's job to stop Metallo, the reaction shot of Clark behind her, she doesn't see him. Her back is to him. But we see this just like crestfallen reaction shot from him, because losing Lois's faith is crushing to him. Yep. And that was it's just a moment, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a blip, and they do nothing to call attention to it. And it just tore my heart out, and I'm a big fan of it. It was very good.
Well, again, just great little character moment, demonstrating, how much Lois's support and belief in Superman really means to Clark, I think that's a great...
She's emblematic of the rest of Metropolis, right? Like, we've talked about this before, that Superman doesn't need people to love him. He's going to do the right thing anyway. But part of what gets him up in the morning is the fact that people look up to him. It's not just saving people's lives. It's also being an amazing example to them. And if he feels like he's losing the faith of the people, and Lois is a great representative of that, then it's going to crush him. Anyway, it was just, again, it's so fast you could blink and miss it, but I caught it, and it just spoke to me. I loved that scene.
Well, and it's again a great attention to detail. Again, I think that, Lois and Clark, this is Superman and Lois. This is one of the core relationships of the show, just as much as, if not more than, like Lex and Superman. This is one of the core ones. So whenever you see, the representation of the average person, or at least what the average person aspires to be, saying "I have doubts" to Superman, that should mean something, right? That should be a big blow to Superman's confidence or belief that he can stop Metallo. I think that's a good point. Okay, so to circle back on the weird sexual creepiness stuff, I just want to articulate, I saw this in your notes when we were planning the episode, and we're talking about how Metallo weirdly kisses Lois, and it's very awkward and gross.
Well, there are a few oblique references to sex in this episode, and most of them are very creepy and very negative, and I'm not okay with it. I don't understand why it's here. It's so clearly a show aimed at kids, right? The fact that we can enjoy it also, notwithstanding, but it's just look at it. It's aimed at children. And you're just going to throw this creepy stuff in there without making a big commentary on how it's super gross and creepy. I know the villain's doing it, and I know that Lois reacts negatively, but I'm telling you, children are impressionable. And
totally.
Male children especially are getting a great many very terrible lessons about how they're supposed to treat women from their media. For it to just show up uncommented on in a Superman cartoon, I was a little repulsed by it, honestly. I don't understand why it's there, and I'm trying really hard not to ascribe ulterior motives or negative motivations to anybody. Okay, I'm trying really hard because we've mentioned that the creative team on this show is not always great with the ladies. But it was so much in this episode, I had to bring it up and say why, and I don't approve. I am now done. I'll take a breath and let you respond.
Well, Joshua, I think at this point, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, I think we need to continue to watch this trend and watch how the show treats women. I don't think we've basically more or less come to terms with women are not treated super well. Maybe Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, by the way, very talented, very great storytellers. These things, again, could both be true. Maybe they don't know how to write for women, but they can also be great storytellers. Those things are both true. I think that maintains here. The only, I'm not going to defend the choices here, but I think the only thing I will say, and this is not like a defense, it's more like an acknowledgement, is that at least John Corben is clearly not a good guy and he's making out with Lois Lane. It'd be one thing if Superman was treating someone that way. That would be like, holy smokes, that's just not okay. That's never okay. But at least it's the bad guy, and it's not like a defense. It's more like, well, at least it wasn't the good guy.
I agree with that. I get you 100%. And that is a mitigating factor, but it's not even a but. I would just say kids aren't good at subtle.
Yes.
Agreed. And this is a show about a man who puts his underwear on the outside of his clothes to do the right thing. And it's just, I'm just really sensitive to it at this point, like raising a boy child and just having to so often turn to him and go, not like that, never like that.
Right.
Is exhausting.
Well, and I do wonder, women in media, just historically in general, have never been treated until...
Oh, it's a hot mess.
Very, very, very recent. And I wouldn't say that it's perfect now, but it's better.
Yeah, even now it's more like we're improving.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're not there. We're just trying. But I would say historical women have never been treated well in media. And I wonder, there are certain things about the night. It's like every decade, it's like they progress a little further. But no matter how much you progress in retrospect, it still looks really bad. So it's like, yeah, even though the bad guys doing the thing, it's still gross and still for children. Anyway, I don't know. It's not okay. It's not okay, and I wish that the writers were a little more mindful of that, even in the 90s. But it is what it is, I guess.
Yes. I mean, we're not going to forgive it. We're not going to pretend that it's not there, but we can say it doesn't necessarily damn the creators or the entire enterprise. But yeah, if I saw this now, I would be...
Oh, yeah.
I would be upset. There would be letters. I would be making calls because it's just, we can do better than this and we should do better than
100%.
This. Even with the villains doing it. And we talked about this in My Girl too. So it's not like this is new. We talked about it when we looked at Batman and Harley Quinn. There are problems.
Well,
there are problems.
And again, I am not one of those people who is like, well, Bruce Timm is a garbage human and he never wrote anything good. I don't think that's true. But I will also say, before he was doing Batman, did pinup drawings. So I think that's something for everyone to keep in mind, that maybe he's not the most equipped to handle writing for women or show running from a woman's perspective. Anyway, we wouldn't have this show without Bruce Timm. That doesn't mean we can't acknowledge that he's got some severe weaknesses.
Yes, there are problems. There are problems.
Yeah. So Joshua, okay. I think we've touched on that. I do want to at least acknowledge the power level check-in this week.
Yes. How's he doing? How super is Superman this episode?
So Superman this week, he didn't do anything too extravagant, but I will say, they really made a big hullabaloo about this explosion on the yacht. Like, and that thing exploded once, and then it mega exploded a second time, and then the third time it was like a quantum explosion. I don't know what was in that gasoline, but it must have been pretty explosive. And Superman, he walked away unfazed. Go back and rewatch it. It explodes no less than 3 times.
Yeah, it's true.
But Superman survived all of it, unfazed, basically. It's so much so that he could go save Lex Luthor from a shark. That came out of nowhere.
Yes. No, that seems like an unreasonable explosion on the yacht, but a reasonable power level for Superman. And it gives us our tremendous final shot of the episode.
Oh, Joshua, I am such a... This is my favorite shot of the episode. I mean, again, I think this is overall a very strong episode, but this final shot is brilliant. And I say that capital B, it's good stuff.
Terrifying. Yes. And it's set up alongside Superman pointing out to Lex that that's going to be a problem for Lex. Like, it's a threat to the world, but also to Lex specifically. And you get like a good reaction shot from him where he's just shocked, like it has not occurred to him that this is going to be a problem for him until Superman says so. And then we cut to Corben just trudging along the bottom of the ocean in that eerie green glow. It's amazing, it's terrifying, and I friggin' love it.
I love it. And I love that it's like a wide shot, like from far away, just so enough so that it's not personal, like, but you still see that green glow, so you're like, oh my gosh, he's coming for all of us. Oh man,
it's like creepy. A force of nature. Yes. It's so good. It's so good.
Now, Joshua, this is a great final shot, and I maintain this is the best final shot, or one of the best final shots of the series we've seen so far. I would be remiss, and I think we've touched on this before, especially I know when we talked about this in Feeding Time, when we talked about Parasite. Yep,
definitely.
I think we can confidently say now, without a shadow of a doubt, they have a clear formula for how they are introducing villains, which is...
Yes, and it's a good formula.
It is tragic backstory... and it always concludes with a ominous, like, Universal Monsters style tease for the next time when he comes back.
Yep, and I like it. It's a good way to do it because you got to reuse these supervillains.
Right.
This is actually a lesson that superhero comics had to learn from Oklahoma native Chester Gould in the Dick Tracy comic strip. Don't kill them all. You're gonna want them around again, and they could have just like left him out in the ocean and not done a thing and brought him back and we all would have been fine. But these promises like Parasite zapping the bug, Toyman's cracked face, this slow trudge across the ocean, these promises, it's like a pit in the pendulum. It's just like it's coming for you. I like it.
Yeah, I love it. And again, we've seen this. We saw it with Brainiac at the end of the 3-part series premiere. We saw it with Toyman. We saw it with Parasite, and now we're on to Metallo. So I think, again, clear pattern, 4th time. We've seen the same tactic used. And again, highly effective. I'm all aboard formulas when they work. So 2 thumbs up from Caleb on this one.
And I'm going to steal that as a segue into our alternate media recommendations because, in all honesty, it is that final scene of Corben walking on the ocean floor and Lex realizing that that's going to be a personal problem that brings me to my alternate media recommendation.
Oh, Joshua, do go on.
Caleb, you watch too many movies. Let's just lay it on the line. So I know you've probably seen what I consider a horror masterpiece, It Follows.
Joshua, this pick is fantastic. I watch this movie no less than once a year. It is one of my favorite horror movies of the 2010s. I think seriously, top 5 horror movies of that decade, 2010 through 2020, or 2019 rather. This is a fantastic movie. So tell me, why did you decide to pick it?
Okay, so in short, your main character of this movie realizes at the beginning that she has had an intimate moment with her boyfriend that she really liked, and her boyfriend informs that he only did that to get the curse off of him and put it onto her. And the curse is that there is something, this being. It can look like anybody, basically, and it's always coming to kill you, and it just moves at a walking pace all the time. It always knows where you are. It never sleeps. It never rests. It's always walking towards you. So can you jump on an airplane and fly away? Absolutely. Can you jump in a car and drive away? Take a bus, whatever you want, but you're eventually going to have to sleep or take a break or get sick or something, and it never does any of those things. And it's just this inexorable, constant pressure that it's always coming after you. And that final scene with Corben and Lex's horrified realization just reminded me of the best parts of It Follows, and I couldn't recommend anything else.
Oh, gosh, Joshua, that's spot on. And I think it just kind of thinking about how that last shot is just Corben walking towards the screen or the audience. That is It Follows. It is. It
yes.
follows, and I don't know if anyone else is like me and they're weird and they've had that dream where you're running away from something, but no matter where you go, it always finds you. This movie is that dream.
Yes.
You were always in a distance. Even if you get far away, you look away, and you'll be like, wow, that's walking towards me in a very slow, probably, but also very specific cadence.
But it's unstoppable. It doesn't matter if it's slow or fast.
No.
It's just going to happen, no matter what you do.
It's
yes,
exactly
it's fantastic.
Terrifying. Joshua, that is a spot-on pick. I love It Follows. Anytime we can work that into the show, I highly recommend it. So I'm taking a different approach, and it's probably just because it's been what's on the brain lately. Now, I know by the time this episode comes out, I believe Westworld season 3 will probably have been concluded or about to conclude. But Westworld,
it'll be close, yeah.
Westworld is on the mind, and I think it fits here because you're talking about like what makes a human human. Like whenever the show sometimes is great, sometimes it's a little too confusing for its own good. But I think
my jury is currently out on season 3, in fact. So yes, do go on.
Oh, you're up to date. Okay, so season 3, I'm more positive than season 2, but still very much jury's out because it's almost. This is a whole other podcast, but I am right in the middle. I'm like, all right, I like the direction we're going in, but you still gotta land the ship, or this whole thing was for nothing. But no, I like Westworld. I like that it poses big philosophical questions about the nature of, do you do what you do because you're programmed to be human, or is it, or a robot, or is it like again, the whole old fashioned like nurture versus nature? Is it in your nature to do the thing, or are you programmed to do it? And even if you are a human put in a robot body, will you still continue to do the same things you did when you were a human? Because that's what you were programmed to do. Or are you subject to new programming? Like whenever you move to another body, can someone change your nature?
Yes.
And again, I think this is present throughout the entire show, but season 3, with one particular and one character in particular named Charlotte, they seem to be dabbling with that idea. I will say no more than that, but there's one character in season 3 specifically, they seem to be looking more closely at that idea than maybe some of the others. So, the show has its ups and its downs. I would say season 1 is a winner for sure. Season 2
definitely.
is, the highs are high, the lows are low, but at the end of the day, if you can put up with the lows, it's worth it. Season 3, jury's out, but I still think it's worth your time to check out. If you are into this whole like humans and robot bodies sort of thing that we've got going on in this episode.
That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I am at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We publish in-depth essays and podcasts on all types of films. You can find all of that over at thecinematropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are all very easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about Double Talk, an episode of the new Batman Adventures.
Until next time, look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's an animated discussion.